We are delighted to have you with us for our afternoon session, where we turn from the world this morning of guns and bombs to then the world of journalism to now the world of money, as we look at the future of the international economic order with two of the leading thinkers and doers in the international economic space. Thanks very much for joining us at Perry Worldhouse, for being a great friend of Worldhouse, and for hosting this afternoon.
Thanks very much, Bill, and it's a real pleasure for me to be here on so many dimensions. So one, having this great celebratory event for the opening of Perry Worldhouse is a wonderful thing. Second, understanding that there are more sides to the global game than the sort of traditional international relations, international security, I think is incredibly important. And so I was very pleased to have the opportunity to think about putting together a session that's focused more on business and the economy than traditional national security. And third, it gives me, I have to tell you, incredible personal delight to have the opportunity to be sharing the stage with my friend Andrew Liveris. Andrew is now, he keeps changing titles. His new title is, he's the executive chairman of DowDuPont, the world's largest chemical company by a long way now. Over Andrew's time, beginning as CEO of Dow in 2004, chairman in 2006, the first big thing you did, no pressure, was to acquire Rome Haas in Philadelphia in 2007-8, just during the financial crisis, and when your Kuwaiti backers backed out. That must seem like an eternity ago, Andrew.
Well, that's the gray hair.
Yeah, or just yesterday. But Andrew did that and not only survived the crisis, but done an extraordinary job pivoting Dow to being a more forward-looking company, more advanced manufacturing, less basic chemicals, more sustainability, a greater focus on sustainability, and of course culminating with the merger with DuPont just down the road in Delaware earlier this year, of which now Andrew is the executive chairman. Another important reason to have Andrew here is because he's played an extraordinary public role for quite a long time now, has served as former chair of the US Business Council, the Business Roundtable, and he's also served in important advisory capacities for both the Obama administration and the Trump administration. Under President Obama, he served on the President's Export Council and co-chaired, I think, and co-founded the Advanced Manufacturing Partnership with my old friend from Yale, Susan Hockfield, who was the president of MIT at the time. And under President Trump, Andrew led the American Manufacturing Council and the Manufacturing Jobs Initiative. And he's pretty passionate about things beyond his day job. His book, Make It in America, was really a call for a domestic transformation of the American economy to upskill and upgrade this economy. But he speaks with maybe even a stranger accent than I do. He was born in Darwin in Australia. Anyone in the room been to Darwin? I've been. You've been to Darwin? Hey, that's not bad. The next question was, could anyone pick Darwin out on a map? I doubt there are many people. It's what we call the Great North in Australia, right at the top. Like so many people of your generation, Andrew, your parents migrated from Southern Europe, from Greece, and then he's an Australian success story. Educated at the University of Queensland, a really great university in Australia, and then started working for Dow in Melbourne, where you still have operations, and then graduated to run Asia for Dow, and then moved to Midland, Michigan to get into corporate HQ, served as Chief Operating Officer, and then CEO and Chairman. On a personal note, I have to say two things about Andrew. The first one is that when I went back to Australia in 2008 from the US, I was founding an institution there called the US Study Center, which was also had as one of its parent partners a very important institution in the US called the American Australian Association. And Andrew's pivotal role in both organizations actually was extraordinary. And in our US Study Center, we had, I think, not only good by Australian standards, but a world-leading sustainability program, which Andrew personally supported, and as did so many of your people, including, I think, your Chief Sustainability Officer, spending time with us in Sydney. So the first personal note for me is that I've just benefited enormously from Andrew's support and actually from learning from him about what it takes to be a leader for many years. And then, of course, he's happy to be here because he's not once but twice a proud Penn parent. And so it's great to have him on campus, if only for about 1 nanosecond of a very busy day. He told me he's just got out of the IBM board meeting where he serves on the board, and he's got to get on the plane as soon as we leave here. But could you join me in welcoming Andrew Liveris?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So Andrew, we discussed in advance, you should know, by the way, that under most circumstances where I would get the opportunity to do something public with a CEO of a very large company, the amount of scrubbing that would happen for what we were going to discuss would be enormous. A phalanx of handlers would be interacting with me on what's in and what's out and what questions can I ask and tell me exactly what you're going to say. But my interaction with Andrew had like 7 5-word bullet points, and the word came back, she's okay, mate, right? We're ready to go on that. So we're ready to go on the agenda. We've got all the big topics. What I'd like to do is try to hit all the very big topics, no holds barred, and then open it up to the audience. Great. So question 1, Andrew, I think the biggest one of all is growth, right? If we have higher levels of economic growth, a lot of the other problems don't go away, but they become less intense. President Trump's been talking about 4% growth, US growth historically after World War II, 3.25, 3.5. What's it going to take to get growth back to the historic level or above the historic level in the US?
Yeah, and thank you, Geoff, for that marvelous introduction, and thank you to my lone Darwin visitor down there, and I apologize in advance for 2 Australian accents on stage, and somewhat modified, maybe, yours and mine, yeah. But it's a great pleasure to be with you. So growth and what's going on. I'll give you a macro kind of view of it, because I think a lot about this topic, clearly, as we've remade our company, as you already articulated. Growth has changed dramatically because of one very big macro topic, and then, of course, a lot of microeconomic topics. The big macro is, for those who aren't aware of it yet, I think we all talk about it, is human civilization is going through one of its every few hundred years massive tipping points. It's a dislocation that's enormous. We used to think that this planet, as it went from 7 billion people to 9 billion by 2050, that's a tipping point in its own right. But the tipping point that's really occurring to all of us, to answer your growth question, is, of course, digitalization. And this new era of information age, as we move up and figure out what to do with this information, and, of course, then go to the next level of it, which is, coming from an IBM board meeting, very topical for me, which is how to use insights that we get from man-made machines. Now, this is changing the nature of work, and it's changing the nature of growth. And right now, we're in the disruption period, and it's showing up in all sorts of ways. The elimination of jobs, the elimination of meaningful work, and right now, we have not yet reached the replacement of it. It's begun, but it's not enough. And so just like 100 years ago, with automation of the kind then, Ford and what he did to create the automobile from going around with horses and carriages, this tipping point and its arrival, we are underprepared for. We are certainly underprepared from a policy point of view. And so some of these councils I've served on, what we've been doing in business is being responsive to it, because the forces of globalization, when colliding with the forces of digitalization, and throw on top of that this massive agenda of humanity that is now very much, can we take all this humanity on this planet? When you think about growth with those 3 big macro trends, certainly with this digitalization one, you've really got to remake yourself to go where growth is. Because right now it's uneven, it's not going to be the regular growth, it's not last century's growth, it's not even last decade's growth. And I don't think we are yet nimble enough, unless we are very much running small little entrepreneurial shops who are showing agility. Whether you're large corporations, large institutions like this storied one, we are not yet nimble enough to redesign ourselves to accommodate this
Okay,
macro trend.
so you've gone to the distributive already,
Yeah.
which tells me that you're not so worried about.
I want to get to micro.
No, but are you worried about how big the pie is rather than how we share it?
The pie is going to be enormously large.
So that's okay.
Yeah, the pie, we're going to get to it, but we're not suited for it.
Okay, so on the innovation side then, so we look at, everyone's looking for innovation drivers, mature organizations, startups. Where do you stand on job creation and job destruction? You're an optimist about advanced manufacturing, for example. If we use more robots, if we use more machines, where are the jobs going to be?
Yeah, so give me 2 more minutes on the first question. I want to get to that one because it relates. So in the immediate term, can we get 3.5% growth in this country? You bet we can. Can we get there through meaningful reforms in some policies to help spur FDI? Yes, we can. We've done it before, under the Clinton era and the Reagan era. Is this current administration working on that? Yes, they are. What sorts of things are going to matter in that? Clearly the tax reform agenda, clearly the FDI spend on infrastructure, and clearly this whole discussion about deregulation. Now, I can go into any one of those, but if you're an optimist on that, this country can get to a 3.5% growth agenda. But we have a massive, massive issue in how government's functioning, a whole other topic. So we're not getting those changes overnight, unless through executive order. I want to come back to that.
Yep.
On your second question, which is this whole notion of job creation versus job elimination, I've already mentioned, just to give you the stats, so 7.5 million jobs left this country of the technology kind between 2008 and 2016 because we weren't supplying the graduates or the people to fill those jobs. So many of us located where people were supplying those jobs, the Chinas, the Indias, the places that were supplying that sort of skill. Of course, importing the skill here was another part of the agenda. We have 500,000 of those jobs open right now, technology jobs. We're graduating roughly between 50,000 and 70,000 a year, so massive under supply. In the next 3 years, there'll be 3.5 million jobs created. We might be able to fill 1.5 million through a combination of graduation and immigration, unless immigration gets fooled with, which we've got a whole other topic on.
I want to ask you all about immigration. So again, what you need to know about Australians is that we're kind of politely rude or the other way around.
I think we're
rudely
direct.
Polite, maybe, I don't know. But I have
Correct.
to interrupt you because I think I just want to underscore a point that you just made that I think is really profound. In this where are the jobs debate, there are really two schools of thought. One says we're destroying all the good jobs. The other says there are lots of good jobs, we just don't have the people to fill them. So you're very much in the second camp,
Definitely
not
in
the
the
first
second
camp.
category. Look, I have job openings at DowDuPont that I can't get the skills for. I have engineering jobs open. We have convinced ourselves that a 4-year college degree of the skills that we used to have for last century is what we should still keep producing, okay? And that retooling needs to happen immediately, okay? STEM and STEM education, which has been oft talked about, it's not in the curricula of elementary, middle, and high schools. And actually, frankly, we also do something very badly in this country, which is we don't celebrate teachers, okay, at elementary, middle, and high school level. We should be putting them on pedestals and giving them the skills to teach STEM. We're opening up a STEM school in Midland, Michigan. Dow's very community-oriented. We've taken Dow money, put it into this elementary and middle school, and I'm opening it up in a few weeks, which is only going to do STEM from intake of children at ages 5 all the way to when they get ready for high school at ages 14. So we're going to just have STEM curricula. Obviously, we'll teach the other things too. Humanities matter. I'm not saying they don't. But we are just not prepared on the supply chain to fill the jobs we're creating. That disruption is creating two other effects. We're unfortunately dumbing down jobs in the retail sector and the service sector. So we're oversupplying graduates that are getting down into jobs that are actually not needing the skills they graduated with. And that's not just universities, it's also community colleges, and that's also high schools. The second thing that's happening is the loss of benefits. So the job of 20, 30 years ago is paying less, wage rates are going nowhere. So there are a lot of unhappy and angry people out there, which is creating the issue that we have with populism.
Yeah.
So we are so upset that our system is not doing the New Deal. This country desperately needs a New Deal a la FDR. This country needs a remake of why we're here. And the good news is, and you and I are both immigrants, we still have a great value system in this country. We haven't lost that. So we should stand tall for that, the freedom model. But we are really behind in the policies that will get job supply to match job creation. And here's the other big issue. If you think the tech revolution is all about the Facebooks and the Googles and all that and the connectivity, you're deadly wrong, okay? Because what's happening is the remaking of complete factory-based automation and supply chains. The interaction between robotics, what's going on with digitization from end to end, from procurement to the supply, order to cash, which is what we're doing, is changing the way machines provide insights to humans who have to read those insights. I can't get enough of those humans. That's the issue we're dealing with in this country. So I don't think we're losing jobs.
It's a supply story for you, the optimist story. Now, I know you're an optimist on another topic, the notion of advanced manufacturing. So I'll throw up for you, as you know, the two skeptic positions on this. Just say, listen, the steel industry ain't coming back to the US because it's all about cost. So that's why it went from England to the US to Japan to China to Vietnam. In anything that's heavily routinized like that, we can't do it. And then the second one just says, why does manufacturing matter anyway? It's only 15% of employment. Why are we obsessed about that? So you are the cheerleader of advanced manufacturing. How do you defend against those two things? You know, manufacturing goes to lowest price. It's an efficiency game. And in the modern economy, there's not a lot of manufacturing anyway. Why do we care about it so much?
If I had the time to write the sequel to the book, I would actually make it in America, which was a clarion cry to get us back to thinking that when we add value to what we have, humans, money, natural resources, when we add value to it, we call that manufacturing. Unfortunately, that's a very poor definition in today's world. And therefore, the term I coined, which has been used oft, is equally as poor, because advanced manufacturing implies what your question just said to me, which is we're going to take what we used to do, okay,
and just make it more advanced.
Somehow make it more advanced.
Yeah.
And when people conjure up that image, they think smokestack, pollution, they think waste, rivers on fire, they think old style, old skill. If I could recoin it, where we're going today as a country, and in fact as a globe, is we are generating a new wave of technology to generate a knowledge economy. And a knowledge economy will need things made. It'll be just made differently. So whether it's something as simple as a device, okay, which we celebrate because we all have them and we become slaves to them, or whether I say it's advanced wind turbines. I mean, my company's working, I visited the factory last week, on advanced fiber composites to enable wind turbines to have blades the size of a football field. And to have those blades light enough, okay, and efficient enough to make wind power a reality. We're the largest generator of private user and generator of wind power in this country. So, and that's technology, that's advanced manufacturing.
Yeah.
That is the collision of sciences. So a knowledge economy based on the collision and intersection of sciences is how I would recoin and represent the topic you raised. Because Geoff, that is where people seem to go. They seem to think that somehow we're going to take yesterday's manufacturing and advance it or do something differently to it. And you know, there's a bit of that that's happened. I'd say your steel example is a good example of that. Nucor is a very viable steel manufacturer in this country using mini mills and new blast furnace technology. It's doable. And let's go to China for a second, because I think it's one of your questions later. When I wrote the book, and now they're on steroids with this formula, what they figured out about the movement of manufacturing from this country to that country, what they figured out is something that we at Dow and many of us in manufacturing know. If you have the shop floor, if you make things, you have the prototype for the next thing so you can innovate. If you stop making those things, okay, your R&D diminishes dramatically. Your R&D prototyping and experimentation diminishes. So if you make, you can innovate. If you don't make, you tend to lose innovation. In 1990, there were 5 foreign-owned labs, R&D laboratories in China. Today, there's 55,000.
Okay, so I've got to stop you right there because I think this is also a very important point, but it's a challenge for the US. What it's saying is you've got to always stay at absolutely the cutting edge.
Yes.
Because developing countries since the beginning of time, the way you develop is you take somebody else's technology and you use it and you do it more cheaply and more efficiently, right? So that will always be the case. Staying at the cutting edge is really hard, but you think it's the only path for the US?
I think it's the best, not only, it's the best path because we're so naturally suited for it if we could just get the policies to help us. I mean, labor arbitrage of unskilled labor, why would we want that? Okay? Capital arbitrage, why would we want that? Money, if you haven't noticed, monetary policy has gone berserk. You know, money's free basically. So things that move around based on labor, unskilled labor and money, okay, fine. Let them go to where they go, and countries maybe need it for that first layer of economic development. This country should be at the most advanced layer of economic development based on technology.
Okay, so that means you want to make it in America, but you don't want to raise the drawbridge. So I did, one of the things I did this morning was an executive education session with a company that's visiting here called SAIC, Shanghai Automotive Industrial Company, which people probably don't know is General Motors' JV partner in China, and they make more cars, more GM badge cars in China than in the US. But there's this issue with globalization, which is that even though globalization has clearly benefited American multinational firms, the American public now believes it doesn't benefit them. There's a Pew survey that came out in the election cycle last year showing that I think it's like 49% of the American population said that the integration in the global economy was bad for America, which is quite remarkable. You know, if you go back to the beginning, globalization really is an American phenomenon. So how do you square the circle between keep borders open in all senses, goods, products, people, you've already mentioned immigration, with a make it in America? Do those things go together, or is there some zero-sumness there?
Well, look, connectivity, digitalization means global supply chains are now here to stay. So if you're going to artificially intervene in those global supply chains, then you've got to put a set of rules in place that create the win-wins. In the book, I don't mean to overquote this book, but I certainly wrote about it back then, and I know President Obama and President Trump have coined the term fair trade, not free trade. Mm-hmm. So I do think that's the topic.
So what makes it fair?
The rules apply both sides equally. So right now, China doesn't practice fair trade. And I've been very vocal about that. And, you know, we still do business in China, but we play by their rules. Now, that's fair by them because they need jobs and they need to scale and they need everything we just talked about. And they do want to become a knowledge economy. And by the way, they're going to get there because they can top down it through their 5-year plans. And, you know, all these big initiatives they've got, which are public policy-driven initiatives like One Belt, One Road, this is the top of China saying, if I'm going to get my 1.3 billion people to the level and quality of life of this country, which is what they want to aspire to, then I've got to put in place policies that give me the ability to employ my people. So that's their rules. Now, we don't do that over here, okay, because we say, no, just a second, if the US opens up its borders, okay, then we will benefit by having access to the lower cost, cheaper, or more available, and I'll have more choices in consumption. And therein lies the flaw, okay? Somewhere along the line, someone wrote a rule that said, we all, will become the world's consumption economy. We will consume to our heart's delight. We will go fill up the shopping cart at Walmart. We'll take it home. We'll take the stuff that's in the home and put it in the basement. We'll take the stuff in the basement and put it on the garage sale driveway.
That's what garages are for,
We'll sell
right?
it to garage sale. Yeah. We'll put some in storage sheds. We'll proliferate storage sheds.
That's a good business too, I guess.
And all these are good businesses, but they're consumption-oriented. So I've got to keep you consuming. How do I keep you consuming? I've got to find the cheapest, best quality goods and I've got to put it on the shelves. And you've all been trained to consume and not to save. Okay? Now, I'm not looking at anyone in particular, but I'm just saying us. Okay?
Collectively, this is true. There's no doubt.
But what I'm saying is that rule did the world wonders. It did Dow wonders. We were able to move around the world, do what we want. We'd always had this big base in the United States called consumption, and we could start replicating it around the world to create consumption. But here's the problem. There ain't other USs out there that consume like this one does.
Nope.
So what you've got to do is have that other great economic driver, which gets back to policies, which is investment. Investment is the biggest job creator out there, actually. And Germany's mastered it, okay? Probably in Europe, the poster child of investment. China's mastered it, okay? And other countries who want to trade with the United States are mastering it because they're incentivizing us. I used to say, and the book I think refers to it, there are two types of countries in the world. Red tape countries and red carpet countries. This country became a red tape country for investment. The amount of regs in the manufacturing sector, and I define manufacturing in the broadest possible sense, per employee, dollar per employee, from 2008, that number was $9,900 per employee. In 2016, that number was $19,500 per employee. On average, between local, state, and Fed regs, to build something, it takes somewhere between 6 and 12 months to get a permit. And the very best states who figured it out, like the Texases, for example, okay, where we're investing like crazy, okay, have figured out how to do that in 3 months. So we have created barriers to investment. We've got cheap money, we've got skills, we've got low-cost energy. We should be having an investment boom in this country.
Okay, so there you do sound like a conventional Republican. We need to streamline Andrew straddles politics, by the way, so I'm saying in this case you sound like a conventional Republican. Streamline regulations, streamline the tax code, but I don't want to, I've got to now be an international citizen. You said that the problem with China is they don't play by our rules.
Right.
If you're in another country, you think it is profoundly unfair that the US, an American company, can take a foreign company or government to court in the United States. It's called Section 301. Do you think that, so the Trump administration is proposing, and it wouldn't be the first, Obama did this, Reagan did this. Reagan did a lot against the Japanese, the previous version of China, to take them to court for their unfair trade practices, but to do it in an American institution rather than a multilateral institution. Isn't that a bit hypocritical of the US?
Well, look, you know, I'm not, you said Republican. I
said you were straddling. This time you were just wearing
I wasn't
your
going to
Republican
qualify
hat.
that.
Okay.
I was going to get to this, you know, what's fair, and where are we in the development?
Who gets to decide what's fair?
Yeah.
I guess that's the question.
Yeah, and look, I'm not America first per se, as currently articulated. I'm a global business person. So I want access on the same rules, and by the way, the same values. Environmental standards, labor standards. We should be exporting the very best standards from this country, because A, we set that standard, and B, we should insist on doing trade with partners who fulfill that standard. So that takes time, and that takes an adjustment, and every now and again it may take enforcement and punishment. And I'm all for that to send a signal.
I'm just wondering whether it should happen in the WTO versus a US court.
WTO just doesn't work, okay? I mean, look, I'm sorry, global institutions are wonderful on paper, they're terrible in practice. Go look at the UN Security Council as a good example of that. So when we go, I have a situation with China right now where I'm trying to sell polysilicon, which goes into solar panels, and I have this massive factory in Michigan, which is under the threat of shutdown because the Chinese have stopped me importing it to favor their producers. Mm-hmm. Okay, now where would I go for that? Okay, where do I go to complain? Okay, at that point, am I an American global company, or am I a global American company? Mm-hmm.
But in
what
a
an
case
interesting
like that,
question to ask, right?
If the Chinese are shooting themselves in the foot by making it more expensive for them, isn't that their problem?
No, because they subsidize. What you've got to understand is that we are in a stage of development where one person's subsidy is the other person's incentive. Okay, so we used to do this a lot here in this country, and until we discovered consumption. So what is a tax policy? A tax policy is an incentive to do what? To create consumption and to create investment, because you figure that both of those will create employment, okay? And then you say, you go under the Obama Manufacturing Council that I co-chaired. What did we do there? We actually said we need policy work, but before we get there, what are we good at? What technology should we incentivize in this country? Everyone does the Silicon Valley thing, right? We got that. We got the Silicon Valley thing. But what else are we good at? Did you know this country is the very best at developing advanced sensors, which for the Internet of Things is like the most enabling technology? Did you know that we are number one in lightweight composites? I mentioned the wind blade turbines earlier, okay? I mean, there is 3D printing. There is a lot of technologies that our various institutions, in a somewhat haphazard way, which is again very American, which is great, that's creativity, have developed best-in-class technologies. Shouldn't we as a country decide to double down and triple down on those technologies and become the world leader in those? Now, when I do that, am I incentivizing or am I subsidizing? Okay? A bit of both, right?
I know. And you wanted to play with that we could have a whole rabbit hole discussion about natural gas exports and other things that probably we don't want to.
That would be a fun one.
Okay, so we shouldn't do that for the purposes of the audience.
You don't have the time for that one.
No, we don't. But I mean, I often, when I talk about this on the innovation economy in the US, I ask anyone, what's the last great innovation in the world that didn't come from the US? And people think about it for a while. My personal answer is high-speed rail, actually. That high-speed rail is really important.
And batteries, maybe?
Yeah, unless the US deserves some credit for batteries. And of course, shout out to Elon Musk, a proud Wharton Penn alum. Let's hope he cracks big battery technology. So the US is an innovation economy. China is 1.4 billion people. India is going to be 1.5 or so. A lot of world growth is going to come there. You've been talking about unfairness in relations between the US and China. Blame China. Used to be a Democratic thing in the 90s. I think it was Sherrod Brown started in Ohio. China's a currency manipulator. China's currency's unfair. Resisted by the Clinton administration. Now the Republicans, populist Republicans, have picked up the blame China thing. Is that good policy, or do we need China to be part of the solution rather than a core part of the problem for the US and for the world economy?
So you know I'm Australian, obviously. I spent 22 years in Asia before I came to the US, and 14 years of those in Hong Kong. And I've made over 200 trips to China in the 70s, 80s, 90s, last decade and this decade. And I go there 6 times a year. My aha moment with China, and maybe everyone else's that goes there a lot, is this realization that actually China is never going to be the United States in terms of an extroverted nation. It's an introverted nation. And therefore, what it wants is its borders secure, its boundaries secure, its part of the world secure, and very inward focused. So what it's all about is very much creating their own business model. And as soon as we try to impose our business model on theirs, okay, is when we have the issues. So I do think this is the topic for this century, which is what does a China-like growth look like as it relates to the US relationship? And if you can get to this point, because I do believe they are at this point, they don't want their rivers on fire. They don't want their people poisoned by bad food safety practices. They don't want to breathe that terrible air. Who's been to Beijing or Shanghai or Guangzhou recently and seen and felt the, you almost the acridness of it? It does remind you of a previous lifetime in the United States. And so they do want to leapfrog over, which is a tremendous opportunity for US companies or global companies of any sort to go there and help them do that. If you are part of their agenda, to help them,
great. Yep.
You can do great. Mm-hmm. Now, what I'm also trying to coach us is to not go there and make them part of our agenda, okay? Which is why you get this inequity. And here's the biggest inequity of them all, which is they have a business model which looks like it's not going to change, that they're going to sponsor state-owned enterprises. So as they globalize, they're going to globalize it very differently the way US globalized, which is state-owned enterprises. So it's going to enter issues like the cybersecurity issues, and do you want a Huawei as part of your, US networks? And all those questions will come up. So I do think we are going to have to learn how to deal with this rising ascendant nation that will, in fact, at some stage this century, okay, be as critical to the world as the United States is today.
But if you're on the sort of threat opportunity mix, how do you apportion it?
Opportunity, you mentioned SAIC and GM. I mean, China's our second largest country. We have 18 facilities there. We employ 5,000 people. It is, and 20 years ago, I could fractions of those numbers. It is a necessary thing to learn how to do it and to create an opportunity. And I just hope that in the rhetoric that goes on in the political domain, underpinning it is what is in essence a strategic and economic dialogue that has the two countries find reconciliation.
Yeah, and I compliment you and other business leaders for attending things like the China Development Forum, where I think I saw you last year in Beijing. I mean, the global CEO heads who go to those public pomp and circumstance events in China is incredible. I think because everyone understands that, you know, you've got to be there. But as you said, it becomes a very subtle business. Last question before we open it up to the audience is really about the role of business leaders in public life, in civic life. So, you know, when I look at that, if I look back in time, certainly to what I might call Globalization 1, the 1990s, business leaders were really on the forefront of that, I think. Then there seems to have been a time when business leaders kind of, if anything, ducked the big public policy issues. And now you get forced back into it, but it tends to be a bit reactive. You know, was Facebook vigilant enough in terms of policing its networks? What do you think the public role of business leaders is? I mean, you know, you've practiced this yourself for a long time, but are you doing it because it's a personal passion, because you think it's right for the corporation, you think it's good for the country and the world? What's your take on the public role of business leadership?
It's a very deep question, which I've given a lot of thought to, and I got to do it with the mindset that the data that you should know about me is I've had 42 years at the Dow Chemical Company, and I've just done 14 years as CEO, or 13 years, and you know, we've changed to suit the modern century. But deeply ingrained in me, I mentioned it earlier, is the values mindset of our founder and the generational shifts through 120 years that have preserved those values as a company that cares for its community. And now the community at the origin and the community in current day has changed in scope. The community at its origin was literally the hometown. Today, it's the planet. And so preserving our planet is a responsibility. It's a moral, ethical, and financial responsibility to impart upon all the stakeholders that are part of your enterprise the right to operate in a sustainable way. Ethical, sustainable, and truly make a difference because you're here. Economic capitalism and Western democracies are not coexisting very well today. In fact, I would venture to say they're beginning to fail. And it's now up to us, the privileged elite who are in rooms like this, to really help everyone. And I'm not talking about socialism, I'm not talking about communism, I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about responsibility. And what better nation than this one to feel responsible for your neighbor? And I do think that notion in the CEO role is a primary notion. On the financial side of it, I can get there very quickly. My license to operate, period. Okay? But that's not what you should do it for. You should do it because it's a responsibility to make sure that what you put in place today has a value tomorrow to us.
Okay, now responsibility is a very powerful word, and as you know, there's a pushback. I think Milton Friedman was the first person to say this, and say, yes, business people have a responsibility. If you lead a public company, it's to your shareholders. So you've just articulated a much broader view. Do you see a tension between responsibility to shareholders and responsibility to community, or do they
Absolutely.
coexist?
The scars on my back, if I bear, and I won't do it, but I mean, I bear witness. I'm unusual that I've survived, not because of financial crisis, because that was a near-death experience, but certainly this notion that financial owners are dislocated from stakeholders that give you the license to operate. And there's a whole other conversation we can have about short-termism that's creating that, okay? What in essence is happening is your pensions are getting managed by asset owners
Like
and asset
Vanguard,
managers.
just down the road.
Well, they're passive, so that actually is even a special category.
Okay.
But these owners and managers deal with financial institutions, sell-side analysts, who deal with companies, boards, and management, who deal with employees. The person whose pension is being managed over here is the employee. On short-termism, it would benefit all of us to actually reduce the employment, fire that employee to preserve the pension. This is how ludicrous we've become. Because you have no say in how your pension gets managed. But it's your jobs that are being threatened by short-termism to make money for the people in the middle. Who made that rule up? And who preserves that rule? Okay? Who dictates, okay, that we have to have a return to enrich the middleman for 12 months? It's a materialism that is definitely driven by money printing. You know, what this country's got is we've got no policy solutions of the fiscal kind. We can't get tax reform. We can't get decent healthcare reform. We can't get infrastructure. We are not functioning. So what's happening is the solution is print money. Print money is flooding money out there, which means money needs a return. Returns don't happen in the money markets unless you create events. Events are to disrupt corporations. Disrupting corporations means firing people.
Okay, so this is your next book, clearly. I don't know what we're going to hold. We had Adam Smith, then we had Karl Marx, and now we've got Andrew Liveris. I love it. So we have some. We have some.
I was a Republican a few minutes ago.
There's a yin and yang here, right? And I'm certainly an
definitely.
equal opportunity offender here. I think we've got time. Someone will tell us when we need to wrap up. I wanted to leave time for people in the audience to ask Andrew questions. As you can tell, he's a shy and retiring kind of guy. So if you ask him a question, he's bound to duck it, but give it a shot.
Thank you.
Who's going first? Who'd like the first question? And please try to keep them pithy, and we'll keep the responses bang, bang, too.
I'll do that.
Thank you. I wonder how you see digital currencies affecting the economic order.
I belong to the Jamie Dimon school of thought there. I think we're heading for a massive bubble. I don't think we know what we're doing. There's no collateral against it. And it's one of these byproducts of the internet that's going to go away. Okay, and that's as pithy as I can get.
Right, so he's don't buy Bitcoin today. All right, that was what we heard here. We should spread the questions around the room and maybe demographically. So looks like we might have some people who look like students in the back of the room. Is that right? Hey, freshmen, even better.
So you said that you are advocating for tax reform and infrastructure spending. So how do you correlate debt increases with economic growth?
Yeah, I mean, so in the beginning of tax reform, which is now almost 2 decades old, okay, we didn't have this burgeoning issue that we now have, right? So we have the entitlement discussion. Previous administration almost got there. John Boehner couldn't organize his side, so it never happened. And so here we go now with this administration, how we're going to make this work, right? So you got to take the two schools of thought, and frankly, I think we just got to bite the bullet and try one of these out. The one that I think that's going to happen is, lowering of rates for everybody, individual rates as corporate rates, a one-timer to get money back, because there's a lot of money stranded overseas, some system of territorial so the US doesn't double tax that encourages us all to keep money overseas, and that to do all that, to basically increase the debt on the hope that the GDP will go up to cover the debt increase.
So you're a bit of a supply sider. You think that if
Well,
you cut taxes, the growth will go up enough that revenues will increase?
Look, Steve Mnuchin thinks that, Gary Cohn thinks that, I think the administration's thinking that. I'm actually at a point, and I hate to say it this way, I'm almost resigned to let's give it a shot. Because the alternative is not going to happen. I will guarantee you this Congress will not give you the alternative, okay?
Revenue neutral tax cuts.
Great buzzline. As I said, we almost got there on the previous administration. I mean, how do you all feel? I mean, do you feel Congress has got an appetite to cooperate on cross-party lines? I mean, doesn't look like it, and so we're doing this, we've got this strange dance going on in DC, and I'm not a big fan of being part of the dance, but as I said, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So you might as well. so I think you got to go bite the bullet on the one I just said. I'm a fan of getting something done.
Excellent. Next question.
One word, what do you think about India?
Yeah. Well, India for me is just going through an amazing leadership change. And Modi, I'm a big fan of his. He was great in Gujarat and what he did there. He's taken what has typically been a very chaotic government system and systemically working his way through. And he's doing reforms and of the type we just talked about. He's got a Made in India initiative. I think if I'm going to be bullish on any country in the world outside the United States, it would be India right now.
Do you think India can have any global champion companies? Reliance does a lot in your neck of the woods. What do you think about Indian companies on the global stage?
So traditionally, no, because of the point we made on China. The rules they played with in India were not transferable to other countries. But that's changing under Modi. So, I don't know, pick one. Mahindra. Mm-hmm. You guys know about them? It started out...
Cycles.
There were tractors and motorcycles, and now cars and trucks. So there's a good example of one that seems to be exporting its model pretty well. So, yeah, I think so. I think we might be surprised by that. And they are very creative people, as you know, and so their technology, their education, I'd be a bull on that happening as well.
Me too. Maybe not tomorrow, 10 years, 20 years, absolutely. How much time we got? A couple more questions, Amy? Let's go for 2 more questions. Thank you.
Hi, so this is a political question. Where is the political will for pro-business, pro-capitalist concerns that also take into account like redistributive concerns as well, welfare concerns?
Yeah, look, I take heart at the notion that the United States system is a check and balance system, and you should take heart at that as a young person. It's one of the reasons he and I are in a country like this. The founding fathers, in the city, just brilliant in the way they enabled that. And I'm a great believer, and certainly my life story is a good example of it, and my trajectory at Dow is a good example. For every zig, there's a zag. That's a very technical term, but there's a lot of corrections that go on. I think we're still heading direction northeast. For example, I'll use a personal anecdote. When we pulled out of Paris, a lot of companies, this one included, went very public saying, no, that's a bad outcome, that we should stay engaged. Thank you, to really get a better solution that's in the direction of where you're heading. Because whether you believe climate change is real or not, you need to be part of the solution. And I happen to think, you mentioned sustainability in my intro, Geoff, that sustainability has a massive business driver. We should all want, in fact, we've made it a business, it is the business driver at our company. And your generation, quite rightly, is putting your imprimatur, on the future. And it's kind of like, I don't know how old you are, Geoff, but certainly my generation, we protested all the time. I actually vividly remember at the University of Queensland protesting against my eventual employer, for things Vietnam, for those of you who don't know any of that. So I do think...
You had conscription in Vietnam, by the way, for people who are watching the Ken Burns series.
So I do think this notion of corrective action will occur. I wouldn't go overboard one way or another on this point because of your system.
Okay, last question. Who gets the last one? I think the woman with the mic power here, you get to decide. Who would you like?
Oops.
We'll go you in the back. Come on.
Another student.
Hi, yeah, I'm Daniel Brennan. I'm a student fellow here at Perry World House. I was very interested in something you said about China being an inward-focused country and how, while we might want to go in and sort of open up the business opportunities there, we don't necessarily want to impose our values on them. And I want to know why not. Because if Chinese ascendancy, as many believe, is a potential threat to our position in the global order, why shouldn't we use all the tools at our disposal to neutralize it?
Yeah, I don't know whether you study history. I've spent a lot of time reading history books and being of Greek origin and seeing how Greece went through its 2,500 years and in its current state, and you say, where were the original Greeks, you know, compared to the current ones? I mean, you got to look at history and say, who imposes what on who? And when you impose values, okay, what do you get? So I think learned behaviors are better than imposition. And I do think over time, there could be some of the points you just made on migration, but just like your nation got free of the UK for a reason, okay, and the UK was not a far analog from the United States back then, but you had a very different view of monarchies versus revolutionaries running your own country. I do think we've got to be very careful with allowing them to exercise their business model and maybe at the end of the day, giving them the best of what we have, which is our strategy. Okay, and I mentioned already they have a need for it, right? But in terms of top-down business model, in terms of their government, there was a time people like me would say it could never last. But it's lasted, and it's taken 400 million people out of poverty. So they have their own proof point that their system works. And I think we've got to be very careful we don't impose. I think we just got to, with time, and I'm talking about a lot of time, your entire career lifetime, you'll be able to see some of those changes. I hope you migrate to the middle, not that or this.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amy Getz, and I'm the Executive Director of Penn Global and appropriately Penn's China Initiative. And it's my pleasure to stand here to thank our panelists, Geoff, Garrett, and Liveris for the stimulus.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have to say that getting a nanosecond of your time gives us enough to chew on for about 3 months. So we really appreciate that. We've had the zig and the zag, the yin and the yang, the Republican and the Marx, the optimism and the pessimism. But I think if I take away one lesson from this presentation today, I bet if I asked this crowd how many of you have bought something at a garage sale, we would have far more hands going up than the numbers who could find Darwin on a map. And I think that there perhaps summarizes some of the concerns we have in the United States about whether we are a consumer society or an investing society, a society that looks inward or outward. But hopefully today we have learned to look outward. This has been a fantastic 2 days here at Perry Worldhouse. We started yesterday with an academic discussion looking at the rise of populism, nationalism, and retrenchment and its impact on human rights, climate change, global politics, and global trade. And then, of course, today we started the day, as Bill said, with Guns and Bombs with Admiral Stavridis, fellow Greek, as well as Michel Flournoy, and then a panel later on in the morning with journalists from France, Germany, Canada, and the US. And now we end with this very stimulating discussion today. It, of course, is our pleasure to invite you all to join for the inaugural Penn-Biden Leaders Dialogue down at Irvine Auditorium. Please don't beat a rush to the door. But if I were being honest, I think the worldview that we are able to discern and hear about here today for someone who sits atop a major multinational firm, a firm that is looking across the world, gives us incredibly powerful insight, as much as we will get from the heads of state who will join us here later today. So thank you very much, and thank you all.
Thanks, Andrew.